The great hall on Nexus Prime buzzed with excitement as thousands of alien beings filled the massive chamber. High Commander Vextal stood at the center platform, his forearms spread wide as he addressed the crowd. His purple skin gleamed under. The bright lights and his three eyes scanned the audience with pride. Today marked the 500th anniversary of what the Zephyrians called the Great Victory. It was the day their ancestors had finally eliminated the last human colony from the galaxy. Vextal's voice boomed across the hall as he began his speech. 500,000 years ago, our brave ancestors faced the greatest threat our galaxy had ever known, he declared. The humans were a plague upon the stars, spreading their violence and chaos wherever they went. They were primitive savages who barely understood the gift of space travel, yet they dared to challenge the natural. Order! The crowd cheered and stamped their feet. Representatives from dozens of conquered worlds nodded in agreement. They had all heard this story many times before, but it never got old. The tale of how their mighty empire had saved the galaxy from the human menace was their greatest source of pride. Vextal continued his speech, painting humans as monsters who destroyed everything they touched. He spoke of their crude weapons and barbaric tactics. He described how they would attack peaceful alien settlements without warning, killing innocents and stealing resources. The humans, he claimed, were incapable of diplomacy or reason, but our ancestors were wise, Vextal said, his voice rising with emotion. They saw the threat these creatures posed to all civilized life. They united the great races of the galaxy and launched the most successful military campaign in history. Planet by planet, system by system, they hunted down every last human nest. Behind Vextal, a massive holographic display showed images from the ancient war. Burning human cities, destroyed spaceships, and empty colonies served as proof of the Zephyrian victory. The audience watched in fascination as the holograms played scenes of human defeat over and over again. The High Commander gestured toward a side chamber where artifacts from human worlds were displayed. Primitive computers, crude weapons, and simple tools sat behind protective barriers like trophies. Alien children often visited these museums to learn about the extinct species that once threatened their peaceful way of life. Look at their pathetic technology. Vextal laughed, pointing at the display. Their fastest ships could barely reach 1/10 of light speed. Their weapons were no more advanced than throwing rocks. Their computers were slower than a child's toy, yet somehow they thought they could conquer the galaxy. More laughter filled the hall. Many of the aliens had never seen human technology before, and they marveled at how primitive it looked. Their own civilization had advanced far beyond such crude tools. They had ships that could cross the galaxy in days, weapons that could destroy entire star systems, and computers that could think faster than any living brain. But Vextal's favorite part of the story was yet to come. He loved describing the final human stronghold, a hidden base in the outer rim of the galaxy where the last survivors had tried to make their stand. According to the ancient records, it had taken 3 full battle fleets to destroy that final outpost. The last humans fought like cornered animals, he said with glee. They knew their end had come, but they refused to surrender. They fired every weapon they had, threw everything they could at our forces, but it was useless. Their primitive technology was no match for Zephyrian might. The crowd erupted in cheers again. Some aliens waved flags bearing the symbol of their empire. Others sang victory songs that had been passed down through generations. The celebration reached its peak as Vexatal described the moment when the final human ship was destroyed, and so ended the greatest threat our galaxy had ever known, he declared. Never again would humans spread their poison among the stars. Never again would innocent worlds fear their savage attacks. Our ancestors had given us the greatest gift possible, a universe free from human contamination. As the cheering died down, Vextal began discussing the glorious civilization that had grown in the centuries since the human extinction. Former human worlds now hosted thriving Zephyrian colonies. Trade routes once terrorized by human pirates were now safe and prosperous. Art, science, and philosophy flourished in ways that would have been impossible while humans still existed. High Commander pointed to various aliens in the audience, each representing worlds that had been liberated from human control. There was Ambassador Clix from the crystal planet of Andor, General Thorn from the gas giant mining stations, and dozens of others. All of them owed their freedom to the ancient victory over humanity. But as Vextal continued his speech, something strange began to happen. Deep in the Outer Rim territories, automated monitoring stations started detecting unusual signals. The patterns were unlike anything they had seen in centuries, yet somehow familiar to the ancient computer systems. Dr. Kyle Martinez sat in a hidden chamber light years away from the celebration, watching the Zephyrian broadcast with quiet amusement. His human features were enhanced by subtle cybernetic implants that glowed softly in the dim light. Behind him, massive screens showed the positions of alien fleets across the galaxy. "They really believe it," he said to his companion, Captain Lisa Wong, who stood nearby with her arms crossed. Her dark hair was pulled back in a military style, and her eyes showed the cold calculation of a trained warrior. "Let them celebrate," Lisa replied. "Their ignorance has served us well for 500,000 years." Kyle nodded and turned his attention to another screen that showed the hidden human facilities scattered throughout the galaxy. Each one was invisible to alien sensors, protected by technology that the Zephyrians could never imagine. Inside these facilities, millions of humans waited in stasis chambers, ready to awaken when the time came. The signals that were now reaching alien monitoring stations were not random. They were carefully planned transmissions designed to announce humanity's return. After 500 millennia of patient preparation, the moment had finally arrived. Back on Nexus Prime, Vextal was reaching the end of his speech when an aide rushed onto the platform. The small alien whispered urgently in the High Commander's ear, and his expression changed from joy to confusion. "What do you mean, human signals?" he hissed quietly. The aide showed him a data pad with readings from the Outer Rim. The mathematical patterns were definitely artificial, but they matched no known alien language. The computer analysis suggested they might be related to ancient human communication protocols, but that was impossible. Vextal tried to maintain his composure as he concluded his speech, but doubt had crept into his voice. The celebration continued around him, but his mind was focused on those mysterious transmissions. How could there be human signals when humans had been extinct for 500,000 years? As the crowd began to disperse, emergency meetings were already being called. Fleet commanders received urgent orders to investigate the signal sources. Scientists were pulled from their research to analyze the strange transmissions. In the depths of space, hidden human facilities continued their preparations. The long sleep was ending, and the galaxy was about to learn that reports of humanity's extinction had been greatly exaggerated. The celebration on Nexus Prime would be remembered as the last day of Zephyrian ignorance, though none of them knew it yet. 1 year after humanity's exile, the galaxy faced its darkest hour. Fleet Admiral Thaxon stood on the bridge of his flagship watching the tactical display with growing horror as another fleet formation was torn apart by the mechanical invaders. The Void Hunters had emerged from the empty space between galaxies, and their robotic war machines were systematically destroying everything in their path. "Report," Thaxon commanded, his voice steady despite the carnage unfolding before him. "We've lost another 12 ships in the Outer Rim sector," his tactical officer replied. "The Void Hunter dreadnoughts are using weapons we've never seen before. Our shields are completely ineffective." Thaxon studied the enemy vessels on his screens. The massive black ships moved with mechanical precision, their weapons cutting through the combined alien fleet like it was made of paper. Each Void Hunter vessel was the size of a small moon, bristling with energy cannons and swarms of smaller attack craft. "How many fleets have we lost so far?" 17 full battle groups in the past month, Admiral. The enemy advance seems unstoppable." The bitter truth was that the galactic military had grown complacent during centuries of peace. Their combat doctrine was based on honor duels and limited engagements between civilized species. They had no experience fighting an enemy that showed no mercy and accepted no surrender. What made the situation even worse was the condition of their equipment. Ships that should have been in perfect fighting condition were breaking down due to failing human-designed components. Weapon systems were misfiring because replacement parts were no longer available. Even basic life support was unreliable on vessels that had depended on human maintenance protocols. On the fortress world of Aegis Prime, Commander Zareth was making a discovery that would have been invaluable months earlier. Hidden in the abandoned human military archives, he found classified files that detailed decades of preparation for exactly this kind of threat. "These records go back almost 50 years, Zareth told his intelligence team. The humans were tracking anomalous signals from dark space and building countermeasures against robotic invaders." His chief analyst, Lieutenant Colven, scrolled through file after file of human intelligence reports. They called the enemy Void Hunters and predicted this invasion down to the specific tactics being used. "Look at this tactical analysis from 10 years ago." Zareth read the human report with growing amazement. The document detailed exactly how the robotic invaders would operate, what weaknesses they might have, and what kinds of weapons would be most effective against them. The humans had even developed prototype countermeasures and defensive strategies. "Why didn't they share this information with the Galactic Council?" Colven asked. "They tried," Zareth replied, pulling up communication logs from the Council archives. Captain Jake Morrison submitted 16 different threat assessments about dark space anomalies. Ambassador Claire Patterson warned the Council about the need for improved military readiness. Every single report was dismissed as human paranoia. The records painted a clear picture of humanity's frustration with galactic leadership. Human military advisors had repeatedly pushed for better weapons, stronger defenses, and more aggressive patrol patterns in the Rim territories. Each suggestion had been rejected as unnecessary warmongering by a species that couldn't control its violent instincts. Now those warnings looked prophetic. The humans hadn't been paranoid or aggressive without reason. They had been the only species smart enough to recognize the coming threat and prepare for it. Zareth accessed more files, finding detailed specifications for weapons designed specifically to combat robotic enemies. The humans had developed electromagnetic pulse weapons, quantum disruption fields, and self-replicating defensive systems. All of this technology had been ready for deployment, waiting only for Council approval that never came. "Sir," Colven said quietly, "there's something else. According to these files, the humans didn't just leave when they were exiled. They took their defensive preparations with them and continued working on countermeasures from beyond the galactic rim. The communication arrays on Aegis Prime were among the few still functioning in the war zone. Zareth used them to scan for any signals from human space, hoping against hope that something might remain of their former allies. What he found stunned him. Faint transmissions were coming from beyond the galactic edge, and the encryption patterns matched human communication protocols. The humans were still out there, and from the signal characteristics, they had built something massive. Meanwhile, the Void Hunter invasion continued its relentless advance. Entire star systems fell silent as the mechanical armies swept through. Inhabited worlds. The robotic invaders showed no interest in conquest or negotiation. They simply destroyed everything in their path with cold efficiency. On Nexus Prime, Chancellor Vextar huddled in his bunker beneath the Capitol building as Void Hunter ships darkened the sky overhead. The council chambers where humanity had been banished now served as an emergency command center, filled with desperate alien leaders trying to coordinate a defense that was already doomed. "Status report from the outer defenses," Vextar demanded. "The orbital platforms are falling one by one," reported General Krixtar. "The Void Hunters are using some kind of adaptive shielding that neutralizes our weapons after the first few hits. Our most powerful cannons are becoming useless within minutes." Vextar closed his eyes and tried not to think about the human military. Advisors who had warned about adaptive enemy technologies. They had suggested developing variable frequency weapons and multi-spectrum attack systems. Those suggestions had been filed away and forgotten. "How long before they reach the surface?" Vextar asked. "Perhaps 6 hours, Chancellor. The defensive grid is collapsing faster than we anticipated." Through the bunker's reinforced windows, Vexatar could see the mechanical dreadnoughts descending through Nexus Prime's atmosphere. Each ship was massive beyond imagination, its hull covered with weapon ports that glowed with malevolent energy. Smaller craft swarmed around them like metallic insects, preparing for the final assault. The galaxy's capital world was about to fall, and with it, any hope of organized resistance against the Void Hunter invasion. The various alien species had never learned to work together effectively in crisis situations. Their military coordination was hampered by cultural differences and political rivalries that humans had somehow managed to navigate. Dr. Cathara worked frantically in her laboratory, trying to restore the communication systems that might allow for one last desperate attempt at contact. If the humans were really still out there, perhaps they might be willing to help despite their exile. "I'm picking up multiple signals from beyond the rim," she reported to anyone still listening on the emergency channels. "The transmission patterns are definitely human in origin, and the power levels suggest a major fleet presence." Her words sparked a flicker of hope among the desperate defenders. Could it be possible that humanity had survived their exile and grown strong enough to face the Void Hunters? The answer came sooner than expected. As the mechanical invaders prepared their final assault on Nexus Prime, space itself seemed to tear open near the galactic rim. Ships began emerging from hyperspace, but these weren't the familiar human vessels that had left a year ago. The new ships were larger, more heavily armed, and built with technologies that seemed almost impossible. They moved with the same precision as the Void Hunters, but radiated an energy signature that was unmistakably human in origin. Admiral Rick Hayes stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the tactical situation with the cold calculation that had made humans such effective military leaders. Behind him, the combined human fleet stretched across space, hundreds of vessels that had been built with one purpose, stopping the Void Hunters. Open a channel to all surviving alien forces, Rick commanded. Let them know the cavalry has arrived. The transmission that reached the desperate defenders on Nexus Prime was crackling with static, but unmistakably human. This is Admiral Hayes of the Human Defense Fleet. We've been tracking the Void Hunter movements for months. Stand down your remaining forces and prepare for immediate evacuation. We're coming in hot. The galaxy that had exiled humanity for being too dangerous was about to discover just how dangerous humans could be when they were properly motivated. The species that had been dismissed as paranoid warmongers were returning as the galaxy's only hope for survival. 6 months after humanity's departure, the galactic economy was in complete freefall. Trade Guild Chairman Vashati coiled his serpentine body around his desk as he reviewed the catastrophic financial reports. His species had built their fortune on interstellar commerce, but that empire was crumbling faster than anyone had imagined possible. The numbers are devastating, his assistant Silka reported, her own scales pale with stress. Trade volume has dropped by 60% in the past month alone. 17 major shipping routes have been abandoned due to pirate activity. Vashati's forked tongue flicked out nervously. What about the alternate routes we established? Most are proving unprofitable or too dangerous to maintain. The human security forces were apparently more important to trade safety than we realized. Their aggressive patrol tactics kept the shipping lanes secure. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Human military commanders had spent decades mapping pirate bases, tracking raider movements, and maintaining the kind of heavy presence that made interstellar crime unprofitable. What the aliens had dismissed as human paranoia was actually sophisticated threat assessment and route protection. Now, with the humans gone, pirates operated with impunity. Merchant vessels traveled in expensive armed convoys, or not at all. Insurance. Rates had increased by 400%, making many trade routes economically impossible. The free flow of goods that had sustained galactic civilization for centuries was grinding to a halt. On the industrial world of Mechanus VII, Chief Engineer Draktar faced his own version of the same crisis. The orbital shipyards that had once produced hundreds of vessels annually were now silent graveyards of half-finished hulls and failed machinery. The fusion cores are completely offline, his deputy Kren reported from the main construction bay. Our attempts to restart them have only made the quantum instabilities worse. Draktar examined the massive power systems with growing frustration. Human engineers had designed these fusion cores to be incredibly efficient and powerful, but they were also incredibly complex. The quantum resonance patterns that made them work were precise to 17 decimal places, and any deviation caused cascading failures throughout the entire system. Have we made any progress with reverse engineering? Draktar asked, though he already knew the answer. Our best scientists have been working around the clock for months, Kren replied. They understand the basic principles, but the implementation requires knowledge and techniques that humans never shared. The cores were essentially black boxes to us. The shipbuilding industry wasn't the only sector facing collapse. Across the galaxy, infrastructure that had relied on human technology was failing at an accelerating rate. Power grids designed by human engineers were experiencing brownouts and blackouts. Transportation systems built with human components were breaking down without replacement parts. Even the communication networks that connected distant worlds were becoming unreliable. On Healer's Rest, the galaxy's primary medical station, Dr. Sylvan was confronting a health crisis that threatened billions of lives. The medical center had been a model of interspecies cooperation, treating patients from dozens of different worlds with remarkable success rates. Now that success was crumbling as human-developed treatments became unavailable. We're facing medicine shortages across 47 different therapeutic categories, Dr. Sylvan explained to the Medical Council. The synthetic compounds that humans developed to work across multiple alien biologies cannot be replicated with our current pharmaceutical capabilities. Council member Dr. Hexara, a distinguished Quellan physician, gestured toward the treatment data. How critical is this situation? Extremely critical, Sylvan replied grimly. Human researchers spent decades learning how to adapt medicines for different alien metabolisms. Dr. Lisa Grant alone developed over 300 cross-species treatments during her career. That knowledge is irreplaceable. The implications were staggering. Diseases that had been easily treatable for generations were now becoming deadly again. The Zilani plague that had been controlled for 50 years was showing signs of resurgence. Thraxian bone rot, virtually eliminated by human-developed therapies, was spreading through mining colonies. Even common infections were becoming serious threats without the broad-spectrum medicines that human biochemists had perfected. Dr. Sylvan pulled up patient statistics that painted an increasingly dire picture. Mortality rates have increased by 30% in just the past month. If these trends continue, we're looking at a medical catastrophe that will affect every inhabited world in the galaxy. The agricultural crisis was proving equally devastating. Coordinator Thren stood in what had once been the galaxy's most productive farming region, watching endless fields of dead and dying crops. The hybrid strains that had fed billions were reverting to their original genetics, producing yields far too small to sustain current population levels. The breakdown is accelerating, reported his chief scientist, Dr. Veltar. Without the genetic stabilization treatments that Dr. Amy Foster developed, the hybrid crops are becoming completely non-viable. Thren's leaves drooped with despair. How long before we face actual famine conditions? Based on current crop failure rates, food shortages will begin within 6 weeks. Full famine conditions will follow within 3 months, unless we can find alternative food sources. The agricultural collapse wasn't limited to hybrid crops. Human-designed soil treatment systems were failing across dozens of worlds, leading to erosion and contamination that would take decades to reverse. Irrigation networks built with human engineering were breaking down, turning fertile farmland into barren wasteland. Even the atmospheric processors that maintained breathable conditions on marginal worlds were beginning to malfunction. At the Galactic Research Institute, Dr. Kethara had become the unofficial expert on the scope of the crisis. Her analysis had evolved from academic curiosity to desperate damage assessment as the cascade effects accelerated beyond anyone's worst projections. The interconnected nature of the failures is what makes this so catastrophic, she explained to a gathering of the galaxy's top scientists. Human technology wasn't just scattered randomly throughout our civilization. It formed the critical backbone of essential systems. She displayed a three-dimensional model showing how human innovations connected different sectors of galactic society. When the fusion cores fail, it shuts down not just shipbuilding, but also the mining operations that provide raw materials. When the mining stops, it affects both manufacturing and agriculture. When agriculture fails, it creates population pressure that strains medical resources. The assembled scientists studied the model with growing horror. The failures weren't isolated incidents, but part of a massive systemic collapse that would accelerate as each sector affected the others. "Is there any way to halt the cascade?" asked Dr. Morden, a senior researcher from the Lumina Collective. Kethara's response was quietly devastating. Not with our current capabilities. The humans spent centuries developing these technologies. We would need decades to reverse engineer even the basic systems, and we don't have decades. Across the galaxy, alien leaders were beginning to comprehend the true scope of their mistake. The Zalani Empire's industrial output had dropped by 70% as manufacturing facilities shut down. The Hive Queen Zath watched her colonies suffer power failures and communication blackouts as human-maintained networks failed. The ethereal Lumina found their advanced research capabilities crippled without the human-designed quantum computers that had powered their greatest discoveries. What they had dismissed as human aggression and unpredictability had actually been humanity's response to the galaxy's inherent dangers and challenges. Humans had quietly solved problems that other species didn't even realize existed, built redundancies into systems that aliens thought were unnecessarily complex, and maintained vigilance against threats that others preferred to ignore. The Galactic civilization that had voted to expel humanity was discovering that it couldn't survive without them. The cascade of failures was accelerating beyond anyone's ability to control, and the worst was yet to come. Food shortages would lead to social unrest. Power failures would cause environmental disasters. Medical crises would become pandemics. In Fatih-Da, the council chambers on Nexus Prime, where humanity had been banished, Chancellor Vextar reviewed reports of crisis after crisis. The decision that was supposed to bring peace and stability to galactic civilization had instead triggered its collapse. For the first time since the vote, Vextar began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake, but it was far too late for second thoughts. The cascade effect was unstoppable, and the galaxy would have to face the consequences of exiling the species that had held their civilization together. 3 months had passed since the last human ship disappeared beyond the galactic rim, and Overseer Gruul was having the worst day of his long Thraxian life. He stood in the control room of Mining Station Alpha, watching red warning lights flash across every display panel. The quantum extractors that had powered Kethvar's economy for nearly a decade were shutting down one by one. "Status report," Gruul demanded, his 4 arms gesturing frantically at the malfunctioning equipment. His assistant, a younger Thraxian named Ket, consulted his datapad with obvious nervousness. "The primary extraction unit went offline at dawn," Ket reported. "The secondary unit is showing critical power fluctuations. The tertiary unit is still operational, but the quantum resonance patterns are becoming unstable." Gruul's mandibles clicked together in frustration. "Have our engineers found a solution?" "They are trying, Overseer. But the human-designed systems are more complex than we anticipated. The instruction manuals were written in human technical language, and much of the specialized knowledge was never properly transferred to our people." The truth was painful, but undeniable. For years, human engineer Pete Collins had offered to train Thraxian technicians in quantum extractor maintenance. The offer had been politely declined each time, as Thraxian pride demanded that they maintain control over their own industrial facilities. Now that pride was costing them millions of credits per day. Halfway across the galaxy, Captain Yilmoth of the merchant vessel Prophet's Dream was learning a different lesson about human absence. His ship limped through the Centauri shipping lanes with a damaged hull and failing shields. 3 pirate vessels had attacked him in what was supposed to be one of the safest trade routes in galactic space. "This makes no sense," Yilmoth muttered to his navigator, a nervous Quellan named Pip. "The Centauri lanes have been secure for decades. pirate activity was virtually non-existent. Pip checked his sensor readings for the 5th time in an hour. The attack patterns are different too, Captain. These raiders are using tactics I've never seen before. They're bolder, more aggressive. What neither alien understood was that human. Patrol fleets had quietly maintained security in the shipping lanes for years. Human commanders had established a reputation for swift, decisive action against pirates. Their policy of shoot first and ask questions later had made raiding an unprofitable and dangerous profession. Without that deterrent, pirates were returning to prey on merchant traffic with renewed confidence. The communication array crackled with distress calls from other merchant vessels. Yilmoth counted 7 separate attacks in the past week alone, compared to perhaps 1 or 2 per month before the human departure. The galactic shipping industry was beginning to hemorrhage both ships and profits. On the pleasure world of New Paradise, tourism director Luxana faced a crisis of her own. The tropical resort planet that had hosted millions of visitors annually was rapidly becoming uninhabitable. Temperature readings climbed higher each day as the climate control systems struggled and failed. "The atmospheric processors are overheating," reported Chief Technician Vren, wiping sweat from his scaled brow. "The cooling systems cannot compensate for the increased thermal output." Luxana studied the environmental data with growing alarm. How long before conditions become dangerous for most species? At current rates of increase, perhaps 2 weeks. The human-designed climate control network is incredibly sophisticated, but without proper maintenance, it's beginning to cascade into total failure. The irony was bitter. Human terraforming engineer Pete Collins had spent years perfecting the climate systems on New Paradise. He had repeatedly offered to train local technicians in system maintenance and emergency procedures. The Luxan government had always politely declined, preferring to keep the human specialists as contracted consultants rather than sharing the technical knowledge. Now Pete was gone, along with all the other humans, and the Paradise world was slowly cooking itself to death. Tourist bookings were being canceled by the thousands as word spread about the environmental crisis. Dr. Kethara sat in her laboratory at the Galactic Research Institute, surrounded by data displays that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. As one of the few Solari scientists who had worked closely with human researchers, she understood the scope of the problem better than most. Her analysis of galactic supply chains revealed a dependency that shocked even her. 78%, she whispered to herself, staring at the final calculation. 78% of all galactic technology contains human-manufactured components or relies on human-designed systems. The numbers were staggering. From basic air recyclers to advanced faster-than-light drives, human innovation had quietly become the foundation of galactic civilization. The other species had been so focused on human military capabilities and aggressive tendencies that they had completely overlooked their technological contributions. Kethara pulled up specific examples, and each one made the situation look worse. The water purification systems used on 47 worlds were based on human filtration technology. The food preservation techniques that allowed for interstellar trade had been developed by human biochemists. Even the communication networks that connected the galaxy relied heavily on human-designed quantum relays. "We didn't just exile humanity," she said aloud to her empty laboratory. "We exiled our entire technological infrastructure." The realization was so overwhelming that Kethara had to sit down. She thought about all the human scientists she had known, colleagues who had shared their knowledge freely and worked tirelessly to solve problems that affected all species. Dr. Lisa Grant had been particularly generous with her medical research, developing treatments that saved lives across 17 different alien biologies. Now that knowledge was gone, locked away beyond the galactic rim with the humans who had been branded too dangerous to remain in civilized space. Meanwhile, in the outer colonies, the first food shortages were beginning to appear. Agricultural coordinator Thren of the Farmers Collective stood in a withering field of hybrid grain, watching months of work die before his eyes. The crop strain had been specifically engineered to grow in the marginal soil conditions of frontier worlds, but without proper maintenance, the genetic modifications were breaking down. The human botanist warned us about this, Thren's assistant, a young Verdani named Sprout, said quietly. Dr. Amy Foster said the hybrid strains would require regular genetic recalibration to remain stable. Thren's leaves rustled with frustration. We assured her that our own agricultural scientists could handle such matters. We did not anticipate that the recalibration process would be so complex. The truth was that human agricultural science had advanced far beyond what other species had achieved. Dr. Amy Foster had spent decades developing hybrid crops that could thrive in the diverse environments of dozens of different worlds. The genetic engineering involved was incredibly sophisticated, requiring constant monitoring and adjustment to maintain stability. Now, across 40 agricultural worlds, crop failures were mounting. The hybrid strains that fed billions of aliens were reverting to their base genetics, producing yields too small to sustain current population levels. Famine was becoming a real possibility for the first time in centuries. The crisis was not limited to food production. On the industrial world of Mechanist 7, Chief Engineer Draktar watched his orbital shipyards shut down one by one as power systems failed. The fusion cores that had run reliably for decades were experiencing cascade failures that no alien engineer seemed able to prevent. The quantum resonance patterns are completely unstable, Draktar reported to his superiors. Our best physicists cannot determine how to restore proper function. The human-designed cores are simply too advanced for our current understanding. The shipyards that had produced vessels for the entire galactic fleet were grinding to a halt. Without replacement parts and new construction, the military and commercial fleets that kept galactic civilization connected would slowly decay into uselessness. Back at the Galactic Research Institute, Dr. Kethera continued her analysis, uncovering layer after layer of human contribution to galactic society. Medical facilities across known space relied on human pharmaceutical research. Transportation networks used human-designed safety systems. Even the Galactic Council's own meeting chambers were climate-controlled by human environmental technology. As the scope of the crisis became clear, Kethera realized that the galaxy had perhaps 3 months before critical systems began failing on a massive scale. The cascade effect would be unstoppable once it began in earnest. Essential services would shut down, trade networks would collapse, and billions of lives would be at risk. The species that had voted to exile humanity for being too dangerous were about to discover just how dangerous the galaxy could be without human protection and innovation. Their celebration of independence was about to become a struggle for survival, and they had no idea what was coming. Captain Jake Morrison stared at the message on his screen for the 3rd time, hoping the words would somehow change. They did not. The recall order from Earth Command was clear and final. All human ships, personnel, and assets were to withdraw from galactic space within 72 hours. The Galactic Council had voted, and humanity was no longer welcome among the stars. Ambassador Claire Patterson sat across from Jake in the small cabin aboard the diplomatic vessel Resilience. Her hands shook as she held her own copy of the Council's decision. 23 alien races had voted unanimously to expel humanity from the galactic community. The reason given was simple yet devastating. Humans were too aggressive, too unpredictable, and too dangerous to remain part of civilized space. "How did it come to this?" Claire whispered, her voice barely audible over the ship's humming engines. She had spent 15 years building relationships with alien diplomats, learning their customs, speaking their languages. All of that work was now meaningless. Jake leaned back in his chair and rubbed his tired eyes. "They never understood us," he said quietly. "Every time we suggested better defenses, they called us paranoid. When we pushed for stronger military preparedness, they said we were warmongers. They wanted us to be something we're not." The communication panel beeped softly. Jake pressed the button, and Admiral Rick Hayes appeared on the screen. The old man looked exhausted, his gray hair more disheveled than usual. Behind him, the command center of Luna Station buzzed with frantic activity. "Jake, Claire," Rick nodded to both of them. "I'm sure you've seen the orders. We're pulling everyone out. Every human in galactic space needs to be home within 3 days. "All of them?" Claire asked, though she already knew the answer. "Every single person," Rick confirmed. "Scientists, traders, colonists, military personnel, even the families who married into alien communities. The Council was very clear about that part." Jake watched the activity behind Rick on the screen. Technicians ran between stations, coordinating the massive withdrawal operation. Ships were already departing from dozens of systems, carrying humans, who had called alien worlds home for generations. "What about our research stations?" Claire asked. "Dr. Lisa Grant has been working on the Kepler project for 8 years. She's on the verge of a breakthrough in cross-species medicine." Rick's expression darkened. "Lisa is already packing up her data. She's not happy about it, but orders are orders. Everything comes home, every person, every piece of technology. We built." The screen flickered as another ship jumped to hyperspace nearby. Jake could see the navigation displays showing dozens of departure vectors. The human exodus was already beginning in earnest. "Sir," Jake said carefully, "what's the real reason they're doing this? The official statement mentions our aggressive nature, but there has to be more to it." Rick was quiet for a long moment. "The Zilani Empire has been pushing for this for months. Chancellor Vextar convinced the others that removing humans would bring peace and stability to their precious galactic community. The insectoid hive queen Zaxth backed him up, and once the Lumina agreed, the rest fell in line like dominoes." Claire stood up and walked to the small porthole. Outside, stars streaked past as the Resilience made its way toward the galactic rim. "They think we're the problem," she said bitterly. 23 different species, and they all agree that humans are the troublemakers." "Maybe we are," Jake said, surprising both Claire and Rick. "Maybe we do ask too many questions and prepare for too many possibilities, but that's who we are. We survived on a world that tried to kill us every day, and we brought that survival instinct to the stars." The communication panel beeped again, and Ben Torres appeared on a separate channel. The captain of the transport vessel New Horizon looked grim as he reported his status. "Admiral, we've cleared the last human research outpost in Sector 7, Ben said. Dr. Pete Collins wasn't happy about leaving his terraforming project on New Paradise. He kept saying the Luxons would regret not maintaining the climate systems properly. Pete always was dramatic, Rick replied, but there was no humor in his voice. "How many more pickups do you have?" 3 more stops, then we're heading home. The last group is at the mining facility on Kethvar. They've been running the quantum extractors for the Thraxians for almost a decade. Jake frowned. Those extractors are human-designed, aren't they? The Thraxians don't know how to maintain them. That's their problem now, Rick said firmly. We offered to train their people multiple times over the years. They always said they preferred to keep their own engineers in charge. The hours passed, slowly as more reports came in. Human ships departed from every corner of galactic space, leaving behind empty stations, abandoned research projects, and confused alien populations who had grown accustomed to human presence. On some worlds, alien friends and colleagues watched in bewilderment as humans packed their belongings and disappeared into the night. Dr. Lisa Grant contacted the Resilience directly as her research vessel departed the Kepler station. Her face on the screen showed a mixture of anger and sadness. 40 years of xenobiological research, she said, holding up a quantum storage device. 40 years of learning how to treat diseases across 17 different species. I've got medicines in here that could save millions of alien lives, and they're throwing it all away. Will you continue the research on Earth? Claire asked. Lisa shook her head. How can I? Half of my data comes from studying living alien subjects. The other half requires access to alien environments and ecosystems. This work dies the moment I cross the galactic border. Jake watched as Lisa's ship joined a growing convoy of human vessels. Military transports, civilian freighters, research ships, and personal craft all moved together toward the rim of known space. It was the largest human migration since the species had first left Earth centuries ago. The final moment came sooner than expected. Captain Ben Torres transmitted his last message from the galactic border, his voice crackling with static, as the New Horizon prepared to jump to hyperspace. This is the last human ship leaving galactic space, Ben announced. To any aliens listening, we leave behind 17 worlds that we helped terraform, 43 research stations that advanced galactic science, and defensive networks that kept you safe from threats you never even knew existed. We hope you remember us kindly when the bills come due. Jake felt the Resilience shudder as it crossed the invisible line marking the edge of galactic space. Behind them lay a civilization of 23 alien species, breathing a collective sigh of relief at humanity's departure. Ahead lay the unknown darkness between galaxies, where humans would have to build something new. Claire looked out the porthole one last time at the distant lights of alien worlds. Do you think they'll manage without us? She asked. Jake considered the question carefully. They think they will, he said finally. But humans have been the glue holding their civilization together for longer than they realize. We fixed their problems, defended their borders, and innovated solutions to challenges they didn't even know they had. Now they get to find out what the galaxy looks like without us. The Resilience completed its jump to hyperspace, leaving the Galactic Council's territory forever. Behind them, alien leaders celebrated their newfound freedom from human interference. They had no idea that they had just removed the one thing keeping their fragile civilization from collapse.